This is not a movie, not a creepypasta. This is a real story the world tried to hide. But tonight, I will tell you exactly what happened. In late January 1959, 9 young hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute prepared for what was meant to be a challenging but routine expedition into the northern Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia. Official documents confirm they were all experienced in dealing with harsh conditions. Their goal was to reach Mount Otorten. According to recovered diaries, spirits were high. They laughed, planned meals, joked about the cold, and wrote about the adventure to come. No entry suggested fear, but their route took them toward a mountain that the local Mansi people called Kolotsiak. That name translates to the Mountain of the Dead. This fact is documented in Mansi tradition. But at the time, none of the hikers treated the name as anything significant. As the group moved deeper into the snow-covered wilderness, the weather began to worsen according to their final recorded log entries. Winds were rising. Temperatures dropped to levels capable of freezing exposed skin within minutes. Yet nothing in the diaries showed panic or fear. They were still making jokes, still documenting meals, still taking photographs. But later, investigators would note this region had unique wind patterns and atmospheric pressure zones that can trigger intense irrational fear and panic in humans. Not hallucinations, but raw terror. Something the hikers would not have recognized or understood if it hit them. On February 1st, 1959, the group set up their tent high along an exposed ridge. Investigators later questioned why they camped there instead of down the slope where tree cover would have provided protection. Theories suggest they could not see the lower forest through the storm. Others believe they simply wanted to make distance. Their last photographs show them constructing the tent. No tension, no distress, no sign of conflict. All evidence confirms the tent was set up properly. They ate. They wrote in journals. Then, at some point during the night, something happened. When the search teams finally located the tent weeks later, they immediately noticed something abnormal. The tent was not opened normally. It had been cut open from the inside. This is confirmed in the criminal investigation reports and forensic notes. Whatever forced them out, it was fast enough that they did not use the entrance. They cut their way out in panic. Supplies inside the tent were untouched: shoes, jackets, food, maps, equipment. Nothing was stolen. No evidence of intruders. For the investigators, this single detail remains one of the most disturbing pieces of physical evidence. Footprints from multiple hikers were found leading down the slope. Bare feet, socks only, thin clothing. Forensic reports confirmed no signs of a struggle at the tent site, meaning they left calmly but rapidly, as if reacting to an internal psychological trigger rather than a physical attacker. The tracks were evenly spaced, not chaotic, which makes the situation even more disturbing. They walked toward the forest in freezing temperatures that could kill within minutes. Something drove them away from shelter. Something they could not stay near, even with boots and coats still inside the tent.
When rescuers reached the forest line below the slope, they discovered the first 2 bodies. Both were underdressed, socks only, thin shirts, no jackets, no boots. According to the autopsy records, they died of hypothermia. But the most unsettling detail, investigators noted signs suggesting both men had tried to climb a nearby cedar tree, possibly to see the tent or to escape something they believed was approaching them. The bark was torn, skin from their hands was embedded in the wood. No other physical threat was found, no animal tracks, no human intruders. The decision to climb a tree in that level of cold is evidence of extreme fear. 3 more hikers were found between the cedar tree and the tent, as if they were trying to return. Forensic analysis indicates they collapsed at different distances, one after another. Their clothing showed no sign of violent assault, no evidence of animal attack, no sign of another human presence. These people froze while attempting to go back, possibly trying to regroup or recover supplies. Theories suggest panic-driven behavior, the type triggered by infrasound or extreme psychological distress, could have forced them to flee initially, only for rational thought to return later. But by then, the cold had already doomed them. The final 4 bodies were not discovered until months later, under deep snow, in a ravine near a small stream. And these bodies were different. The autopsy reports documented major internal trauma. One hiker had massive chest fractures, injuries comparable to a vehicular collision. Another had a severely fractured skull. Yet strangely, there were no external wounds, no cuts, no bruising consistent with blunt force from outside. The force came from within. This single detail has never been explained with certainty. Some specialists claim a sudden pressure wave, sonic or explosive, could do this internally. Another disturbing detail: traces of radiation were found on some of the clothing. Not enough to be lethal, but enough to be abnormal. Soviet investigators tried to downplay this in early reports. Some of the discovered clothing also appeared to be cut or torn, as if strips were removed to provide warmth to others. Autopsy shows signs suggesting that at least one member survived longer than others and removed clothing from those who were already dead. There were no signs of foul play in this clothing transfer, but the presence of radiation, unexplained in that region, remains a major unresolved point. Once the bodies were examined, the Soviet Union closed the case with a vague statement: a compelling natural force. That was the official conclusion. No further clarification, no explanation of the violent internal injuries, no explanation of the missing tongue, no explanation for the radiation. For decades, files related to the incident were classified within military archives. Witnesses who saw unusual orange spheres in the sky that night were not considered credible. The case was quietly buried. The government's refusal to discuss details only increased suspicion.
Several independent witnesses in nearby regions reported seeing bright orange spheres floating over the Ural Mountains on the same night the hikers died. These witnesses were not connected to the hikers and had no reason to fabricate anything. Their testimonies were recorded in local documents and news fragments. These lights were described as silent, slow-moving, and unlike any aircraft known at the time. The detail becomes suspicious because the Soviet military was secretly testing rocket technologies in remote areas during the late 1950s. The question remains, were these lights connected, or was it only coincidence? A popular theory argues the hikers accidentally entered a restricted military testing zone. Declassified documents decades later confirmed the presence of parachute mines in use for experimental detonation patterns around that era. These mines can explode above ground, creating a concussion blast that causes internal injuries without leaving external trauma. This detail aligns disturbingly well with the autopsy results. However, there is no direct record placing these weapons exactly at Dyatlov Pass on that particular night. If such tests were happening, they would have been highly classified. The military would never officially admit it. Another theory proposes something invisible to the eyes: infrasound. Strong wind patterns hitting the mountain ridge could have produced a frequency below human hearing range. Such frequencies have been proven in controlled tests to cause overwhelming dread, panic, and physical nausea. If this happened in the tent that night, the hikers might have experienced sudden terror without understanding the cause, triggering an instinctive flight response. Their logical mind would have returned later, but at that point they were already far from shelter and already freezing. This theory explains behavior, but not the internal injuries. One of the hikers, Lyudmila Dubinina, was found with her tongue missing. The official reports stated that the tongue was removed after death. There were no cut markings, no signs of violent removal, no signs of animal interference. Some forensic experts suggest it could have been a natural result of decomposition in the running stream where her body was located. But the problem is, her body was found in winter, in freezing water, conditions that slow decomposition dramatically. The tongue's disappearance remains unexplained. This detail is one of the most famous elements of the case. Autopsy findings showed something chilling. Some of the last hikers to die were wearing the clothing of those who died earlier. This suggests that at least 2 or 3 survived for hours, possibly even longer after the others died. They stripped clothes from bodies to survive. This is not speculation. This is in the forensic record. This detail confirms there were final survivors struggling until their final breath. Yet even those final survivors made no attempt to return to civilization, no attempt to build a proper shelter. Something had mentally shattered this team. One unresolved psychological element is the hikers' refusal to return to shelter. The tent contained everything they needed: jackets, boots, food, heat sources, yet not a single member returned to retrieve proper clothing. This is the most unnatural behavioral detail of the case. For experienced hikers, the tent is survival. Investigators concluded that whatever triggered their panic was located at the tent itself, something so disturbing that even when they began freezing to death, the tent was not an option anymore. This does not prove a specific threat, but it proves something mentally catastrophic took place, something internal or external that overwhelmed rational thought. Despite horror speculation, forensic reports stated there were no defensive wounds, no fractures on hands, no bruising on knuckles, no weapon injuries. If these 9 people were attacked, there should have been signs. There were none. This is one reason paranormal and UFO theories became popular, because the evidence did not match any normal physical attacker. Yet professionals argue that does not mean supernatural involvement. It simply means the threat
if physical, was not hand-to-hand. It could have been sound pressure. It could have been a blast wave. It could have been fear itself. In May 1959, the official investigation was abruptly terminated. The government stated only one phrase: a spontaneous force of nature. No specifics included. Evidence was sealed. Some witnesses were told not to speak publicly. A number of documents disappeared. Decades later, when some files resurfaced, huge portions were missing. The incident was remembered, but only whispered. For many years, the Soviet Union preferred silence. The Dyatlov Pass incident was treated like a classified embarrassment rather than a tragedy. In recent years, groups of researchers, geologists, physicists, survival experts returned to the pass with new technology. They recreated slope angles, wind patterns, snow pressure layers. Some modern simulations suggest that a rare type of slab avalanche could have hit the tent with brutal force, not burying them, but shaking the tent violently enough to trigger blind panic. Then the cold killed them. This theory is currently the most accepted scientific model, yet it explains only part of the case, and not the strangest details, such as radiation or missing tissue. To this day, there are more than a dozen official theories, but no absolute answer. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains a collision between science and fear. We know 9 intelligent, experienced hikers ran into the freezing darkness without clothes, which is not rational behavior. We know some suffered internal damage comparable to massive impact trauma. We know evidence was altered, hidden, or lost, and we know nothing in nature has ever perfectly matched all the facts. The region where they died has become a symbol of unanswered terror. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. The Dyatlov Pass incident remains one of them.